Welcome to Class Act Coaching, a podcast for teachers and instructional coaches. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe every one of you deserves a coach. Whether you're inspiring students or guiding teachers, let our school improvement team be your coach this week. Well, hello. Welcome back to another week of the Class Act Coaching podcast. I'm here with Dan, my co-host. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Ashley. How are you today?
I'm great. What were you going to call me?
I'm going to call you Christy because
okay.
I was just listening to Christy's episode and I was in my mind, but you're Ashley. I know that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, good. I'm glad you brought up Christy, actually. That's great that you called me that because my question for you today relates to the episode. We just did a two-parter with her and she talked about 4 different things that we can do to kind of make sure a student goes from passing the classroom test to passing the state assessments and going past the classroom. And one of the things she talked about was how important it is to get our students to be curious. I thought it'd be great if we had an entire lesson dedicated to curiosity and how to make students curious. So do you have a coach that can help me with that?
I do. In fact, as I was listening to her episode, I was thinking about the whole idea of curiosity, motivation, and interest. And I thought, I've been reading about that and I've been doing a lot of research. And there's some concepts that I think would be helpful to spark student interest and to spark motivation in the classroom. So maybe I'll help you with this one, if that's okay with you.
Oh, that's great. It's been a while since you've been the coach. So yeah. I think it's time that you come back and coach us through something.
Ashley, what if I told you that there's an instructional tool out there that has a greater impact on students than some of the things that actually people think have impact on them, that has a bigger impact than talent or their background or their home life? What would you say to that?
Tell me about it.
Okay. Can I ask you another question? You know that motivation is important for learning, right?
Yes.
But did you know that there's been research that had identified specific techniques that any teacher can use that will increase motivation? Did you know that?
I did not know that, and I want to know about it now.
Ashley, we've all heard it said that some students just aren't motivated, right? That they come to class not interested.
Yes.
But what if I told you that disengagement isn't the student's fault, but it's actually considered to be a product of a learning environment?
I mean, I don't like being blamed for it, but no, I
don't.
get it. I get it. I agree. I know.
All right. So what did you notice, Ashley, about those 3 statements I just gave you?
Well, you talked about my own knowledge, what I know already and what I think. And then you tried to give me a new way to think about something that maybe I hadn't thought of about it before.
Yeah. So I kind of gave you some provocative questions. I definitely tried to tap into things you already know. And I also kind of tried to stir up a little controversy. Notice how you got a little defensive when I said that sometimes kids not being motivated is more on the teacher than the student. That got you a little prickly. And that was my intention. I was trying to find the controversy in this topic because we're going to talk about motivation. And there's a book, and we'll put a link to the book. It's a fantastic book. It's called Classroom Instruction That Works 2.0, or maybe it's the new Classroom Instruction That Works. When I started teaching, there was it was called Marzano, right? And he wrote a book called Classroom Instruction That Works. Well, Marzano was the lead author, but it was published by an organization. And that organization has produced a new book based on more current research, old research, and a lot of current research. And it's called The New Classroom Instruction That Works. And that's where a lot of the concepts I'm going to talk about have come from, that I've been sort of really trying to dig into, also from my experience working in classrooms. So just a couple research pieces about curiosity that I want to get out there. First of all, it is probably student interest, motivation, curiosity have probably the biggest impact on students' learning. If I think of all of the dials that a teacher has that they want to turn up, if they can turn up curiosity, those students are going to learn more than in any other class. There's evidence that student achievement index scores ranging from 8 to 49%. It can go up. Their index scores can go up from 8% to 50 percentile points, which is very, very big. The term that they use is cognitive interest cues. That's the term we're going to be using. As a teacher, what I want you to think about, Ashley, in your classroom is how can you create cognitive interest cues? And here's just a little bit about why we need to think about this. It's obvious, right? Motivation is important. You were going to say something?
Right? Yeah, well, I was just going to say, and you might be planning to do this anyway, but I just want to make sure you're going to say what a cognitive interest cue is.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and maybe give an example that
Yeah, we're going to get into that in depth.
I figured.
But I'm going to tell you about cognitive interest cues in a second. But just here's more reasons why it's important. Think about all the stuff that your brain absorbs at any moment. The sounds, the smells, the bits. So, our senses absorb what they say 11 million bits of information per second. But they say the brain can only process about 120 bits. So 11 million bits of information, 120 bits is what we can actually process. So we have to concentrate in order to learn something. Duh. Right? And they say that motivation accounts for 14% of the variance in student outcomes. And things like teacher quality, socioeconomic, those are 13%, 10% variance. So motivation, a student's motivation is one of the most important things that affect students' ability to succeed. And again, that's kind of obvious, right? But the research shows that we can impact it. Let me ask you something I want to ask your opinion about internal versus external rewards. What are your thoughts on that in terms of motivation?
I mean, I'm sure you're going to have research that's going to tell me I'm wrong about whatever I think here, but I personally think it's so individual dependent. So I know I do well sometimes with external rewards, but I know there's a lot of students that I've had that do better with internal rewards. I can bribe them all I want. It's not going to help until they want to do it. Whereas some people are kind of externally driven and react to the way everybody reacts to the way people act around them, obviously, but to a higher extreme, I think.
I think we've all seen teachers or worked with teachers who use candy, right? That's kind of the typical reward. But we also give grades as an external reward. Parents give, money sometimes. I know I tried to bribe my student to read with money. And what the research
said your student, I think you meant your son. You don't bribe your students with money, right?
I did not. Did I say students?
You did.
I apologize. I bribed my son.
That's a good teacher to be bribing them with money.
Yeah, well, there's schools that I think have tried things like that. And that's the thing. It doesn't work. No, I did not bribe them with money. I didn't have that much money. I was a teacher. So extrinsic rewards can be effective for simple tasks. So when you think about things like cleaning up the classroom, memorizing a few vocabulary words, okay? Like you have 10 spelling words. You need to memorize them. If you can memorize these words, right, you'll get a reward. Simple tasks can be effective.
And I want to add that when I said I've seen it work really well externally, I did partly mean things like I'll do extra credit, do this, and the person with the best title on their paper gets extra credit or something like that. And I have seen that work, but I was also thinking external as in praise. And so seeing a student that really responds to
Yep.
being told, wow, that was some great thinking. Wow, so maybe that's not exactly what you meant, but that's what
That
I
is
was
what I meant. No, that counts
okay.
too. That's external. That's external. Again, yeah, it'll help with simple tasks. But if you want someone to pass your course or learn something as complex as learning a skill, learning how to write well, learning how to write with voice, to really learn how to persuade a person through writing using quality evidence. That is a cognitive complex task. Learning how to solve complex math problems. External rewards are far less effective, and there's several reasons why. They start to associate doing it with the reward and not with the actual sort of satisfaction of doing the work. And they see what they're doing as negative and something that has to be rewarded in order to do it. And that's not sustainable over time, because in order to do something well, it takes persistence. And people are generally not going to persist on things. And if it's seen as something that is not something that they want to do anyway.
You made me think of an example of that maybe will help you prove your point that from my own real life. That's a
Please.
story my family tells all the time of when I was in kindergarten and I did not like learning things unless like I loved to learn, but I didn't want to learn because you told me to learn. Like I was going to learn what I wanted to learn. And so my teacher started bribing me with candy to say my ABCs, which I knew, but I refused to say in class apparently. And I would always say my ABCs whenever I was asked to, because she would give me an M&M after I did it. And then we had maybe a substitute teacher, or maybe it was a different class, I'm not sure. But the teacher asked me to say the ABCs and I wouldn't, and I wouldn't. And I didn't know about the M&M thing, and I refused to say it. And she definitely thought that I needed to be held back from kindergarten because I hadn't learned my ABCs because I refused to do it without those M&Ms.
Right. And that's and so it works the opposite way too, with negative. So I've seen teachers threaten students with homework if they don't do right. And what you're teaching the students is that homework is a punishment, right? Learning is a punishment. I think of my son, I told you who I was paying, I wanted him to read. I'm an English teacher. I want him to read until he found books that he liked. He just wasn't going to read. And there wasn't much money or anything that was going to make him do it, because it takes time, it takes persistence, it takes, focus, concentration. And our minds are such that, they will go away from what we're trying to concentrate on if we're not intrinsically motivated. So that's the first thing to consider, is our job in terms of motivation is to figure out what is going to click intrinsically, not what is going to make them just do the thing because it has to get done. That's a mind shift as a teacher we want to think about. So the term cognitive interest cue, I mentioned that earlier. It's basically something that you do in a lesson that stimulates motivation and makes the learning relevant and interesting to the kids. And it can be very small and it can be very big. So there's 4 principles to a cognitive interest cue. And I'm just going to give you these principles and give you some examples. If you think of some examples, feel free to share with me.
Okay.
One thing about a cognitive interest cue is it needs to be related to the outcome of the lesson. Sometimes we think about getting kids' attention and we'll be like, hey, everyone gets a car, right? Or you say something wild like, my house burned down yesterday. Now that I have your attention, let's start doing some math. Attention doesn't matter if it's like just a gimmick. It has to relate directly to what the kids are learning. Does that make sense?
It reminds me of when I worked in marketing before I got into education. I worked in marketing, which I still do. I do communications here, but different type of marketing that I used to do. And one of the things that I learned there is if you ever see somebody giving a gift card, out like you do our survey, fill out our feedback, sign up for our thing, and you get a gift card, and the gift card is generic, you're going to get a whole lot of responses, but you're not going to get good responses, and they're not going to help your business any. What really works is when you give something specific to your audience that only your audience would want. So for like, if I was marketing to teachers and I gave a box of school supplies, something like that, that teachers would want, but that other people wouldn't want. So only people actually interested in my product are like getting on my mailing list. And
Exactly.
it kind of makes me, I mean, I know this is obviously going to be different, but it kind of makes me think of that's what I'm going. That's the direction my mind's going as you're saying this, that if I'm rewarding the class or trying to get them interested in something, it's not just comic books, because I know they like comic books, even though it has
Right.
nothing to do with what
Like
we're
I'm going to
talking
start my
about.
class with a cartoon
Yeah.
because, guys, you're going to enjoy this hysterical cartoon. Okay. Now that I got you laughing and focused, let's start the lecture. In classrooms, the way this manifests itself as in terms of a non-example is journals and bell ringers. So in class, a lot of English teachers will start class with a free write or a journal entry. And it might be, tell me about a time when you went on a trip, or an argument you had with a friend. And the idea is to get them in class, focused, ready to learn and practice something writing. Well, if that question isn't related to the standard or the goal for the entire lesson, it's basically meaningless. It's not going to help or I should say, it's not going to increase their interest in the lesson. Whereas if I'm reading about The Great Gatsby and I have them write about, a time they had a big party, right? Or something crazy they did for a boy or a girl to try to get them to like them or to notice them. Okay. Now I'm asking them about a question that's related to the goal. So another thing to think about is they call it hands-on learning experiences. Something that is going to be an experience where they're going to do something. So a cognitive interest cue can really work well when the kids have to do something. They're not just listening and being passive. So what can you get them to do that is active? One thing that I see teachers do in math a lot is word sorts. Okay. So you have you have equations, and then you have another, two forms of representation. One is an equation and one might be a number, right? And you have to sort them into pairs that go together. And they might be very simple, right? So 4 divided by 2, and then you have the number 2, right? Those two are kind of the same. 6 times this times that equals this, and then you have the number. I'm very basic in math. Sorting, card sorts is what we call those. That's an experience where you're doing something. You're not necessarily, the teacher hasn't provided a lot of information. But in science, it could be a dissection. I mean, that's kind of a lot, but I've seen teachers pass out owl pellets, right? And you have to sort of look at the owl pellet and figure out the ecosystem based on that. I know you're looking at me like that's gross, but that's the point, is that it's gross. It creates it's an experience, but it's related to the lesson. It's building some curiosity. The third one is what you mentioned earlier, which is fostering a personal connection, right? How is this related to your life? So if you teach psychology, that's a great one, right? Because we can talk about, I can say, you guys are going to be writing an essay about, depression. And I want you to think about somebody who's experienced depression, or if you know anybody. In math, one thing that people will do, especially you can do this now with AI, is creating word problems with the students' interests. So was a period where Pokemon was big, right? So if you create math problems where kids are doing something with Pokemon, again, easier to do now with AI, suddenly you're personalizing it. And if you find out what students in your class, what movies they're watching, what TV shows they're watching, that will pique their interest. Personal connections. You do that a lot in your writing class, don't you?
I try. I definitely try. I try to make it as relatable to them as possible. Sometimes it's hard. I mean, I can always get better at that, but it is something that I work to do. But
Yeah.
I really like the idea of what you just said of like using AI to kind of, was maybe it's like with the Pokemon example you used. The only reason I know anything about Pokemon is because I know the little main character is Ash Ketchum. Because when it got really popular, people used to be like, Ash Ketchum to me all the time. Like, because my
Do you
name's
look like Ash
Ashley.
Ketchum?
Well, no, because my name's Ashley, and a lot of people call
Oh,
me
okay, that makes
Ash.
sense. I see.
Like a lot of like my friends and everything will call me Ash. And so they'd be like, "Oh yeah, Ash Ketchum," just because of that. And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And
That's funny.
finally, somebody had to say like, "Oh, that's the guy's name," and I was
Ash
like,
Ketchum.
"Oh."
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, so like, I don't know anything about Pokemon though. So if I'm like, "Oh, all my students are really into Pokemon," I'm either gonna have to go like watch a bunch of Pokemon on my own, or I'm not gonna be able to use that in my class. So I do like the idea of kind of using AI to kind of be like, okay, I have this word problem. Here's what I did. Can you give me an example of the same word problem, but with Pokemon? Because my students are really into that. Or
Exactly.
with this.
Take this word problem and change it so that it incorporates or these topics or
Yeah.
so that that's part of what the kids are saying. So the last principle, I said 4 principles. The first one is related to the outcome for a cognitive interest cue. Second, make it an experience. Make it something that students are doing. Maybe with, it could be writing, it could be talking, it could be dissecting, it could be just handling, word sorts, card sorts, exploring different pictures and putting post-it notes on those things, but make it something that they physically have to write, draw, talk, and do. Foster a personal connection so that they find out what the interests are of your students and try to incorporate that into your cue. And the fourth one is my favorite. And this is the one that is, for some people, difficult, which is make it cognitively challenging. Make it cognitively challenging. It turns out that people are more motivated to learn when they're presented with challenging work as opposed to basic drill and kill work. If you think about it in terms of ideas, if you think about it in terms of what the kids are asked to produce, yeah, they'll complain. Don't get me wrong. They'll whine. They'll complain. But overall, in classes, even in a sort of standard class, when they're given challenging texts, when they're given thought-provoking lessons, or they're given higher level vocabulary to learn and to use, they actually are more interested and engaged in the lesson. It sometimes doesn't feel that way in class, but if you stick with it, you'll find that the kids see that you believe in them and that they find it interesting to be challenged and they find it interesting to learn. I think one thing that we have to remember is that humans are hardwired to learn. That's how we've survived over time. We don't have claws. We don't have big teeth. We're not fast. We can't jump. We can't hide. We can't change colors. But we can learn really well. And so you can actually tap into that desire to learn by giving people challenging tasks.
And that makes sense to me on the sense that I know who likes busy work. If they feel like they're not getting anything out of it, they're not learning, they're not doing anything, even if they would tell you, I don't care about learning, I don't need to learn. My nieces are at that age now. They're 9 and they're 8 and 10, and one's about to turn 10. And so they'll say things like, school, I have to read, boring. And I'll be like, you're not gonna like that, whatever, like you don't know how to read and all your friends do. Oh, we don't care about that. Like that's not what we do with our friends. So like they would tell you they don't care about learning, but they do. They learn stuff all the time. So that makes sense to me that it's like, yeah, when you find it busy work, that's not important.
So what I'd like us to do, Ashley, is think of an assignment or a lesson that you're going to be teaching or that you teach. And let's see if we can dial up the curiosity interest cue in that
Okay.
lesson.
All right. So I am going to think about a lesson that I know I have trouble getting students interested in, or a topic that I know students have trouble getting interested in. And that is something that you started this lesson with. You started by showing your research because, you want to show that you're credible, right? Getting students to want to do the research, getting them to like, oh, I'll tell you my opinion. I'll talk about what I think about this all day long. But like, oh, now I have to go find what other people think to support what I'm saying. That I don't want to do. I'm just gonna go do a Google search and use the first, link that I find on Google. So getting them interested in research, getting them thinking about research, making it fun and curious and getting them, actually processing the information can be tough.
So let's think about it in terms of building on what they already know. So one template that we sometimes use is blank, but did you know blank?
Okay.
Uh, right? So what if you told your students something like, research is important or research is part of learning. But did you know that 85% of jobs in the future are going to require research in order to be successful? You know that we can use AI tools now to do a lot of research. But did you know that people who are able to do research well actually end up making X amount of money or end up creating the AI tools? You see what I'm doing? I'm taking what they already know, and then I'm trying to throw in something that's going to make them go, huh, oh, I didn't know
Okay.
that. Some examples might be, about verbs, but did you know that there's weak verbs and strong verbs? And what's the difference? So that's more of a basic one. Anything coming to your mind for writing, for research? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah. Let's see. You know that you need to support your argument with research, but
Right.
did you know that,
Some support sucks.
yeah, like that, okay, that's really good. That's like that not all support is the same.
Right, something
Like
like that.
some's good,
And then the
some's bad.
question, and then we ask them, what do you think is the difference between good support and bad support? Okay. So let's try something else. All right. For our research. Sometimes I want, is there a controversy that we can use to get them thinking about research? You know, like what I just said, research is going to be one of the most important skills people have in the future. I don't know. Or so the opposite, people shouldn't have to learn research skills anymore. We have the internet.
Right.
Are research skills even worth learning in the age of the internet? So what I'm doing here to start my lesson is trying to create a controversy
Yes.
or
And you
another.
created it in my head because now I want to argue with you that yes, of course they are.
Right.
Saying, well,
But
that it
that's a
works
good
for
point though,
me.
right? Are research skills even worth learning in the age of AI? So that conversation is going to build interest. Or another thing you might do is challenge misconceptions. So taking that similarly is research isn't necessary or how about this one? In the age of AI, being good at research is going to be even more important than it's ever been before. So but I think that in the age of AI, research is just going to be done. It's going to be automated. What are we even talking about? But in reality, there's going to be so much misinformation out there that the people who are going to actually be valuable are going to be the ones who can decipher it.
Okay. That makes sense to me.
So I'm taking a misconception and I'm challenging it. And now we're interested.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the last thing, let's just think about research from the perspective of relevant connections. What are some examples of when your students might use research skills in their lives?
Outside of the class, you mean?
Sure.
You say
Or
that.
in a job.
So wait, they can use it in the job or just like at home on the when they're
I
talking
guess
to
I
clients?
just want a real world application. We're just
Okay.
thinking about real world applications.
The real world application of when they would use research. I mean, it's such a hard question to answer because literally everything, like if you argue with a friend, you should have some support to back
Um,
it up. And so you should always be doing research. If you're going to have an opinion on anything, it should be based in research. So everywhere, every day, that's
so
hard.
forming opinions
It's
is
like
one.
you go to the grocery store, since we're asking for a specific example, you go to the grocery store and you need to decide between two brands. Like, does it matter that one's maybe a little bit more expensive? Is the quality better? Like I might look at reviews online to see like what are people saying about these two different cheese brands that I'm looking at right now. So
And I think health would be a big one. You know, the old saying I hear people say, I've done the research. Well, what does that mean? Right? What does that actually mean? And what does that look like? And what's good research versus bad research? So I'm thinking about as a lesson, right? You could even pull up different examples of where people in the research. People talk about vaccines, people talk about history, they talk about politics, people do their own research about having children, about costs of living, about buying a house, where you're going to have to, I'm thinking a little bigger than the grocery store, right? But ask people, showing your students, asking them to do some research even in the beginning of class, putting up those scenarios, a scenario of like, there's a pandemic, they're coming out with a vaccine. How would you research this? You see what so real
yeah,
life experiences that they've had.
I think that's a really great example too of the good and bad, the idea of good and bad, because it seems like it's so controversial now to say do your own research. It means something bad almost. I've seen, and it's really funny, I've seen like a Halloween decoration where it's like little tombstones that you can put in your yard. And it's always like, did their own research, like it's because what tends to happen is people say, oh, I did my own research. And so now I know that science is bad. I don't want to get into in too controversial here, too political, but
Go
they
for
do
it.
these
Keep
things
going.
where they watch a video on YouTube and then that's their research and then they know everything so they don't have to listen to a doctor anymore.
Yeah. But so starting the lesson with examples and maybe even having them use their computers to do some quick research and asking them, where'd they go? What did they do? Well, I Googled it. Okay. What information did you get? So, but things that they do in their life normally over the course of time. All right. I want to wrap things up here, Ashley. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to provide you and our listeners with a handout that's kind of a quick guide
Okay.
for planning curiosity hooks. And it talks about setting your learning goal, sparking curiosity with mystery, conflict, suspense, controversy, learning about students and their lives and using that. And it just has some guiding questions and some templates. So
Okay.
I
Sounds
think
great.
that'll help our folks.
You can get that in the show notes.
So for homework, what I'd like you to do, Ashley, is in your next lesson with your students, I want you to try one of these curiosity cues,
Okay.
curiosity interest cue. And I want you to come back and tell me how it went.
All right. I'll try it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in today. This has been really helpful. And I hope it will be helpful for everybody out there and all the students that might get a new lesson because of it too. So thank you as always for coming in.
Thank you, Ashley. I'll see you in a little while
All
for our
right.
next problem of practice.
All right. Looking forward to it. Bye.
Well, thanks, Dan, for those great tips. Ashley, I'd love to hear some things you can take from what Dan said back to your classroom.
Well, for starters, I'm going to say guilty. I don't know if guilty is the right word, but I am a big user of extra credit in my class. I'm just like, hey, if you tell me you read the instructions, I'll give you some extra credit. If you write a good title on your paper, I'll give you some extra credit. Just anything to bribe my students into doing some work. They talked about the internal versus external motivators and how maybe for a small task, it's okay to offer that extra credit. But like, if I really want them to be deep thinkers and care about it, that's not enough. They need to have that internal motivator and not just trying to get that extra credit on the paper.
Yeah, and that's where those cognitive interest cues came into play. If we want our kids to be deep thinkers and intrinsically motivated, we've got to raise that cognitive level using these 4 cues that Dan gave.
Yeah, and I also really liked the idea of making connections. And I know this is a small part of what we talked about today, but the idea of even using AI to help you rewrite a math word problem. I am always interested in hearing about what my students are interested in, but I'm not always interested in that thing. Like our example being Pokemon in the lesson. I don't necessarily care to go watch a bunch of Pokemon just because that's what my students are interested in, or whatever it is today. Some new anime, really
Yeah.
popular. A lot of my students are into anime. I am not, but I still want to be able to use that for them. And it's really a good way, I think, to be able to use AI in a kind of fair and ethical and decent way is here's my assignment that I wrote, that I did, that I want to give my students. Can you help me make connections to this thing that they're interested in that I know nothing about? So I thought that was really, really a useful tip.
Yeah, I thought that was great. I don't want to go watch a bunch of Pokemon either. So we're in the same boat there.
Good. I'd feel really bad if you were like, what? Whatever my students are interested in, I always go learn everything about it.
Yes, I have 24 hours in the day and I use them all, right?
Yeah.
So can I talk about coaching tips now?
Yes, please do.
When I listened to this podcast and listened to what Dan had to say, I was thinking about, I think statements are true for adult learning too. And so when I think about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, if I want a teacher to do something, a simple task, an extrinsic reward might work. But if I want them to really own their planning or own their lesson or own the student learning that happened in the lesson, these cognitive interest cues are interesting. If I'm going to do some professional development with the teachers, I want to relate it to the outcome. I don't want to just do I've been in professional development where they have this and the icebreaker has nothing to do with what we're learning. And I'm sitting in the back thinking, why am I doing this? Who cares? Right? And have you ever done one of those silly icebreakers?
Yes.
I'm not saying they're all bad, but I'm saying it would sure be interesting if we could relate it to the task. It's the equivalent, I think Dan shared in a classroom where we do a warm up, and the warm up has nothing to do with the learning. If
Right.
I want to relate it, if I'm reading about pharaohs, I post a picture of a pharaoh, and I have the kids notice and wonder about that picture. Like I relate it to the outcome that's happening. I think we have to do that as coaches when we're working with teachers. They're asking the question all the time, why are we doing this? And when I relate everything to the outcome, they know that answer.
Right.
And then I love the make it experience. So often in professional development or when I'm working with a teacher, the expert does all of the talking.
Yes.
In a class, right? In a classroom, the teacher does
definitely
all
been
of
there.
the talking. The expert in the room, the person who knows the most about the topic is the one who talks the whole time. And so we have to make it an experience. As coaches, I want to create experiences for teachers so that they're actually the one who's doing the work is doing the learning.
I love that because as somebody that has really bad ADHD, if you talk to me for 2 hours, I don't care if you're saying something incredibly fascinating that I'm very interested in, my mind is going to be off on Jupiter. Like I'm not going to be able to just sit there and listen for that long.
Yeah, I love it. And then that third one is teachers, adults in particular. I would say this is true for students. The third tip was build upon what they already know. And so teachers come with a variety of experience and a wealth of experience, and we have to honor that experience and then build upon it so that we can take them and to move them to a different place. But we can't ignore the experience that they already have. So I love that one.
Yes, I thought that was really good too.
And then the last one is ask curiosity provoking questions. And I think Dan phrased it sometimes as controversial questions. I love as a coach being in a classroom, observing something that happens and being able to ask a question. Like a couple weeks ago, I was in a classroom. I taught a lesson. I don't know the kids. I'm coming in cold. And so I'm able to, and that's an interesting perspective sometimes because I don't have preconceived notions about the kids. And so I teach a lesson in front of the teacher. There's a bunch of teachers in the back. They're watching. The classroom teachers in the room watching the lesson, learning from what's going on. At the end, she reflects. I'm like, what'd you think? She's like, man, that student that you called on, I can't believe you even called on him. And when he came up, what he did was amazing. I've never seen him do that. And I was able to ask the curiosity provoking question of, what's that communicate to you? She thought for a little while. She said, that communicates that I shortchange my students, right? That curiosity provoking question. We have to be able to ask those as coaches and come up with those things that have those teachers reflecting to say, sometimes as teachers, we, through experiences, form opinions about our students that aren't always true. And so that was one of those when Dan was talking about that with relationship, with a teacher-student relationship, I was thinking about it from a coach-teacher experience. I have to be willing to and be thinking about those curiosity-provoking questions that will hopefully, in that example I just gave, take that teacher and have her thinking, man, how can I call on that student more often than I have been in the past, and not just kind of prejudging that student.
That's great. And I love that example. I think that's a really powerful example. So,
yeah. So I love that our podcasts can work with teacher-student relationships and coach-teacher relationships or administrator-teacher relationships. We really want to build the capacity of all shareholders in education.
That's great. Thank you for being here with me these last few weeks. I've really enjoyed it.
I hope you invite me back sometime soon.
I'm sure we definitely will.
Well, thank you.
All right. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Class Act Coaching, brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit sreb.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.